More uncertainty is becoming present around the Montreal Canadiens and the 2024 NHL Draft, and while a recent mock draft by Craig Button has them landing Cayden Lindstrom at 5, a tweet by Marco D'Amico has started to shroud this whole thing in a little tiny bit of doubt. We're going to be going into that, plus some potential new trade targets that we haven't really talked about too much on the channel, and finally, a new list of best fantasy defenseman prospects, and the Habs, well, they're well featured on this list. All of that's coming up on this episode of Habs Digest. Welcome everyone into the live stream Monday, June 17th. Thank you all. 63 people in here already. Jesse, we already got some love for you down in the chat. Is Jesse here? Yay, of course, Jesse is here. Thank you, everyone. A, saying first time being able to make it live before it starts. Well, we're going to have lots of great discussion just for you. And you know what? For all you fine folks that are able to tune in this early to the stream, we're just going to get straight into the content. So the people that show up later, you can let them know what they missed. Jesse, I want to start with this. I want to start with this tweet by Marco D'Amico. Now, he makes it clear that this is not, like, based in necessarily anything super factual, but he does say, like, he's fairly tuned in. He said he keeps hearing the names of Beck, Xhekaj, and Boyum as in terms of options for the Canadiens as alternatives to Demidov, Lindstrom, and Iginla. But he said it could very well be a smokescreen to hide the Habs' true intentions, but the certainty that existed is gone. Mind games for the next 10 days. And on top of this, there was a mock draft posted today by head of scouting at TSN, Craig Button, and he had this to say as he picked Cayden Lindstrom still going to Montreal at 5 despite these injuries. He said he's an imposing figure on the ice. He can do it with skill. He can do it with will. He can do it with physical play. You're not going to be able to deny Cayden Lindstrom when he gets it going in the game. He reminds me so much of JT Miller. Jesse, that is a nice, formidable comparison from Craig Button there. But with all this uncertainty coming out now, I feel like every single day I'm less and less sure about who the Habs are gonna pick. There's a reason I put the poll there for if the fans think it's gonna be Lindstrom or not, and it's pretty close to 50-50. I mean, what are your thoughts on all this stuff coming out these last few days?
We gotta have the backup plan, right? And I think that obviously Xhekaj and you could argue Boyum, are very solid in their own regards in that way, right? Like for me, I also really like a lot that Iginla is getting mentioned. We can't forget about our boy TJ Iginla. And I think I'd like to talk about Xhekaj and Iginla for a second. It's like, don't they kind of remind you, Josh, in terms of how they compete, like these are both players for me that are there, that are winning puck battles on the ice, but there's also just so much. I think they have so much potential. Obviously, I'm not the only one that's very high on these prospects. They're high up in the draft for a reason, right? But just the way that they play in particular. Now, we all know that we want, that Cayden Lindstrom for the reason, you can tell Button's big on Cayden. That's definitely Button. He's a Lindstrom guy for sure. You can just tell, but at the same time, we got to think of what's the nuclear option? What if Columbus Blue Jackets are trying to spite us, they're trying to take a forward early. We don't know exactly what Chicago's doing yet. We have to have those backup plans, right? And as much as we want just kind of that, offensive kind of talented guy, obviously we see Benica.
I've done that so many times.
Right? That's going to be our new nickname if he gets drafted by the Habs, right? It's like, it's just because it's that combination again of just, a little bit of that grit, right? Again, if we're trying to become that playoff team, which a lot of that skill at the same time, but we see the mind games is something that Kent Hughes, or should I call him Professor Xavier, really excels in.
Professor X.
Now let us know, chat. Do we need to get a Professor Xavier animation for Kent Hughes? Let us know.
Someone cooked here.
Right, for sure.
Well, Kent is doing everything he can, Jesse, to make this team what it's going to be in the future, right? And whether that's picking Cayden Lindstrom, whether that's picking Boyum, we don't know, right? And as I'm going to take a look over at the chat and the poll, I want to say hi to the channel members. We got Planko in here. Planko always in these streams. Thank you so much for being here. And Planko actually reminding you guys to leave a like on the stream. Hey, we really appreciate it. If you guys could just take 1 second to hit like on the stream, show us you appreciate the content, show other Habs fans to promote our stuff to them. We really love it. I see Denis Ronget. Denis, mainstay in the stream. Thank you so much for being here, Denis. And Jesse, the poll now has gone to 51% people saying it's not going to be Lindstrom, 49 saying yes, with 67 votes. We got some people in chat saying they've seen Boyum play, which I've seen a few highlights of Boyum and watched a bit of him in the Frozen Four. Not too much, I must say, but he did look quite good, and I think his upside is absolutely phenomenal. And I think you mentioned a good point there, and that's Columbus. And they are extremely unpredictable. And a lot of what's going to be available to Montreal is heavily dependent on not only Columbus, but also Chicago. And of course, now that we know that Don Waddell is in charge there in Columbus, there's going to be some weird stuff. There may or may not be some animosity towards the Montreal Canadiens. I'd like to err on the side of him being professional, Don Waddell, and not doing this, but you never really know in this business, right? But hey, just today, Columbus just fired their head coach, Pascal Vincent, just like not even an hour ago, I think. So there's already a bit of turmoil there, but there's lots of rumors that they're going to take Lindstrom, Jesse, and with the increasing rumors that Chicago is going to take Demidov, and then maybe Levshunov could go at 3, you're left with this like random assortment of players. And while Xhekaj Guhle is probably still really high up on the Habs list, a lot higher than I think some people would expect, I actually really think Xhekaj Guhle is going to go a bit higher than people think in this draft. I think Calgary fans at number 9 are not going to be able to get him where they want him. But then you have Beck and Seneca. But then you have the phenomenal defenseman. There's a world where Anton Salayev, the 6'7" beast who skates like unbelievably well. Yeah, he needs to work on his puck skills a bit, and he won't be able to come over to the NHL for at least 2 more seasons as he finishes up his contract in the KHL. He could be available. He's a unicorn, right? But you have him ranked as high as 2 on some mock drafts and as low as 16 on some others. One that came out today, I believe it was Dauber, had him at 16. And you got Berkeley Catton in the mix. But to me, I'm actually, Jesse, I'm starting to come around a lot more on the idea of picking a defenseman. And I want to bring up this quote from Arpen. I got to click back into here before I do that. Yeah, sorry about that. So I want to bring up this quote from Arpen Basu. No, not you, Cole Iserman. One sec, this one. I think both Boyum and Perek would be considered at number 5. I wanted to bring this back up, though it's difficult to handicap which one would be preferred. So this is not something that's crazy, Jesse. I mean, we know the Habs really like Boyum. We know they like Perek. We haven't heard a whole lot about Levshunov or Salayev. Levshunov it feels like a lock he's going to Chicago. But if it comes down to it, like, I know we're upset. And I know we've kind of talked about this over and over and over. But is there a world where Montreal just picks a defenseman even over a Lindstrom? And let's ignore the back injury. I know Lindstrom is the perfect fit, basically, right? If he's healthy. But is there a world, like, if Montreal just genuinely starts to see Boyum as like, and they're like here like this, and Boyum just edges Lindstrom a bit in their mind, do you think Kent does what he says he's going to do and say we just take best player available? Because I don't see a world where he trades that pick at that point.
Well, Kent did mention that if he feels that the players are very close in terms of potential and everything, then he is going to go for need in that case. You know, when I think they are close enough. So I think that if Lindstrom is available, you're absolutely picking him. Demidov is available. You're absolutely picking him. But it's a fair point, Josh. If those 2 guys are gone, all bets are off. Mm-hmm. And that's why I think it's fair that we're bringing up a lot of these rumors, a lot of what we're hearing right now of either Boyum or Perek. And I'm happy that we're talking about that as well, because obviously Boyum, you know, coming off that NCAA championship, obviously super effective, playing great hockey when it matters the most. But it's like, if you are, let's say you're Montreal Canadiens, obviously the nuclear option has happened. I feel like you got to go for the right hand D, at least the right shot D in Perek, right? In this case, I just feel like we got Reinbacher. That helps a lot, but we could use a little bit more. Obviously, Mayu, I think, you know, has a bright future with this team, but we know Savard, right? He's fought so many battles. We don't know quite how many he has left in him, right? Defenseman is one of those things, especially his type, where when they start to go bad for him, it falls off a cliff really quickly, right? So you kind of want to be ahead of that curve, ahead of that happening. I'm not saying that's happened. Obviously, David Savard put in a valiant season this last year for the Montreal Canadiens, right? But I feel like if you are going for D, even though you could say, okay, we all have already so many kind of offensive type of guys, right? With Reinbacher, who has a little bit of upside, you know, but I just think on our right side is really where you'd want to secure that.
It's really interesting. There's so many possibilities, and I see a chat here from Denny, and I think it's very fitting, Jesse. He said if a general manager lets his decision be based on his emotions or his feelings, it's a loser of a pick. Like that's the thing. You can't let it get to their heads. And I think you guys might be surprised at how many GMs end up doing that kind of thing and aren't as invested in the analytics as the Habs are, but the big thing about this draft, Jesse, I think this was really well reflected in Craig Button's mock draft. Like, there's no one I'd be upset with unless they go crazy off the board. I'd be surprised, but if they did that, I'd feel like in my heart of hearts, it'd be like, oh, well, I think there's a good reason. So all in all, I think Lindstrom is still the pick. If Demidov's available, then you have a serious discussion, but apples to apples, I don't even, like, they're both really good, and I wouldn't be upset with either. So we'll have to just wait and see. I think we'll move on from the draft stuff for now. But thank you all guys for the poll. It ended. Jesse, 56% of people said that no, Cayden Lindstrom would not be the pick at 5 if he's available. 43% of people said yes. So very close, actually, for people thinking we should go for Lindstrom or not. But I wanted to move in to the next topic of the video. And this is something that you sent me earlier from Dauber Prospects, one of the top websites if you want to get any information on prospects and stuff and young players. They do their list of fantasy prospect defensemen, kind of defensemen that haven't fully graduated to like the NHL level and their upside for a fantasy hockey league sort of in the future, right? So they did theirs recently, and there's a few Habs defensemen mentioned. Notably, Lane Hutson at 4th, moving up from his January ranking of number 7 all the way up to number 4. You see Alexander Nikishin, the KHL standout. He was phenomenal in the KHL, Jesse. One of the few young KHL defensemen that was around the age of Bogdan that outproduced him. So Alexander Nikishin definitely has some big upside for Carolina. Fantastic pick there. And you have other highly touted prospects like Brandt Clark and David Juraj, who are a little further along than Lane Hutson, but Lane still slots in at number 4 with a 63.6 prospect rating, the same as Simon Edmundson. This is pretty cool. I mean, like, I know our instinct is to say Lane is almost underrated, but like, I think that's actually really good to see him at number 4. And before I let you answer, I apologize, I got to get to this super chat because we got our first super chat of the stream. And when you give a super chat, you get recognized right away. Real Milton Bradley, thank you so much for being here. You're here quite a bit. I recognize you for sure. I put a small $5 on Seneca. It's not €5, so not so sure. But hey, you know what? Small 5 on Seneca, I feel like could have a big payout for you. So that's a nice guess. I think we'll talk a little bit about him as we go. But Jesse, thank you very much, Real Milton Bradley, for $5. Sincerely appreciate that. When it comes to Hutson, do you think he's in the right spot on this list? Do you think he's too low? I mean, I feel like number 4 with these other names there, I'm pretty pumped to see how highly that they rate him.
He's up there with, some top prospects. David Juraj, we see him going very high at the draft not too long ago, right? So for a second round pick in Hutson, you got to feel good about this, but he's about to climb this even more. He's going to be a darling for fantasy leagues. Get him while you can, right? Because obviously if we're looking for just offensive numbers, which is what this look at, prospects, D-men, obviously Lane Hutson, I'm so happy to see him getting that respect that he really deserves, right? Because there's every reason, Josh, to kind of knock on him, right? You have every reason, okay, maybe he's a little bit smaller, but this guy could be the puck mover that this team really needs to translate from defense to the offense that this team sorely needs, right? This team needs offense, but we think all the time, you need just forwards to get more points in offense. But really, it's the D that really translates that play, right? If you don't have that first breakout pass, it's really so hard to establish a proper offense, right? So I feel like Lane Hutson is going to be so key for this team just going forward, right? Obviously helping the offense so much. We know that this is his skill. This is what he does well, right? And you're just looking at him like, for sure there's the size. Like you could say he's a small guy, but when you look at like his hockey IQ, when you look at his compete level, his skills, his quick feet, but then also his pedigree, right? Because he's coming from a family of players that look like they're all destined to make the NHL. Like they have been groomed for this opportunity, just ready to go, right? So I'm so happy to see Lane getting the love that he deserves.
And I think they're predicting a lot of points from him, right? Like Lane's going to get a lot of opportunity on Montreal to put up points. He's going to get a lot of opportunity with the puck on his stick to create whatever kind of offense he wants to create. And I think they're seeing that with him, right? And like, you can't have him at number 1, and I understand why. There are valid concerns with him, while the other guys are maybe a little further along in their development. They have that size already, and they've shown some of that offensive flash, like that crazy potential. Having Lane at number 4 is absolutely phenomenal in my eyes. The idea that he's going to be one of these high point producers for the long term for Montreal is really cool. I wanted to go over the other guys on this list as well. They actually have David Reinbacher at number 24 on this list, moving up from number 33 all the way up to 24, which is pretty cool, right next to Seamus Casey. And the final one I wanted to show is Logan Mailloux, actually moving up from 41 to 37. So both these guys, like, still not crazy high, but I guess that kind of makes sense. I feel like Mailloux could arguably be a bit higher, but I think they're probably hedging the fact that he's not very good defensively, and he might not get the NHL minutes that he'll need to be a valuable fantasy player down the road. And Reinbacher, again, he's more of that kind of, I don't want to say full-on shutdown D, but he's a smooth skater. He's kind of a do-it-all kind of guy, as opposed to a guy who's going to generate you a ton of offense. So I kind of get it. Like, Reinbacher's not a guy who's going to get you a ton of block shots or a ton of hits. He'll get you some. He'll get you plenty. But I think he'll get you a nice mix of that plus goal scoring, plus assists, offensive stats. So I feel like Reinbacher could be a bit higher, but again, there's that level of uncertainty with him so far in North America. Would you have either of these any higher? It's hard to say when there's so many other prospects that I'm going to be honest, I just don't know much about. Like I'm looking at this list, Jesse, and I'm looking at, okay, Michael Benning, and I'm looking at Seamus Casey. Like, unfortunately, I don't have much of a scouting report on these guys. I feel like it's about right, and I feel like you can hedge your bets with these guys who are, not yet proven at the NHL level, or at least at a nice high level in North America for a bigger sample size, and they don't have that crazy offensive flash potential of Lane Hutson, although maybe Mailloux does. I'm not upset with this. I feel like maybe Mailloux could be a bit higher, but I kind of understand why he is where he is.
Yeah, definitely. And, with both these players, I'm just happy to see them getting their love in their own way, because I think that both Reinbacher and Mailloux can definitely contribute offensively. I think it's kind of a slept-on factor with Reinbacher. I think he's going to turn a lot of heads and actually really surprise us. While, like you said, like being so consistent, defensively as well, this being such an all-around defenseman. I think Kaiden Guhle, but like, dare I say, even a tier higher, right? At his peak, I really think that David Reinbacher can be that type of guy, right? But I think that they're both, at the same time, like Mailloux and Reinbacher, they might not have as high of like an offensive ceiling as Hutson, but definitely like safer bets just in general with their size and everything else. Because that's what's interesting about this is like Lane Hutson, if you're looking at where some people have him ranked in terms of NHL certainty, right now it's at an 8.5 out of 10, which is pretty high now, which I'm really happy to see. But I almost feel like Lane Hutson's star potential is exactly that as well. It's like an 8.5, like 85% that this guy's going to be stars. I feel like if he makes the NHL, it's either he's going to be a star and dominate in it and just be one of the best offensive defensemen in the league, or he's just not going to be able to find his place. Maybe gets thrown around a little bit, injury just causes his career to sort of fizzle. Now, I don't think that the latter is going to be the case, but I do think like Lane Hutson is one of those boomer bust type of guys, which I think is so exciting about him.
Yeah, it's crazy, and I already feel like I've seen the boom. Like I already seen these 2 games. I'm just like, I'm excited to see what comes next. But it's very, very interesting because, I think all these guys have. I would actually say Mailloux probably has a higher pure offensive ceiling than Reinbacher. But obviously, I think Reinbacher's impact ceiling it far exceeds what Mailloux's is. And I think Mailloux's good. I just think that Reinbacher as an overall player is going to be much more effective, especially in the passing game, right? Well, Mailloux is probably going to generate maybe more scoring chances. But it is what it is. We're going to have to see. I'm going to take a second, though, Jesse. We're talking about defensemen. And I want to go to the chat here because you guys are going nuts here in the chat. There's trade talk. There's stuff out the wazoo here. We got people talking about Cayden Lindstrom's injury, but we have people saying you got to take Demidov or Iginla, but we're seeing people talking about Guhle being traded. And I'm just going to read through here. Do you think, Andrew Thompson says, do you think the Habs draft a D and then trade Guhle for a top 6 forward? So that's something we've been thinking about as well. Like that's one of these wild predictions I've had in my head, Jesse, of like you trade Guhle for Zegras and then you draft Sam Dickinson as like kind of his replacement. I don't know, because then it's like, basically, do you think whoever you could pick at forward is going to be better than Zegras, if that makes sense, right? So, or do you think whoever you'll pick at D is better than Guhle? That's a weird one. I don't see that ever happening, but it's kind of crazy. And we're seeing people say, like, Mailloux could be worth a top 10 to 15 pick. I don't think he is yet, especially with his defensive lapses. Any of our other lefties are traded before Guhle, I agree. That's kind of crazy, Jesse. I mean, it's something I've actually seen appear more and more and more as the days go on. This idea that the Habs could trade Guhle for an established top 6 guy, like, because obviously you got to move talent to get talent. You want a top 6 guy, trade a top pairing defenseman. I guess it kind of makes sense. I just feel Guhle's value is very, very high for Montreal. While his point production wasn't there last year, he has shown glimpses of him being a phenomenal point producer, like a potential 40 to 50 point guy. He was on that pace a couple of seasons ago, while also being a solid shutdown guy and a guy that can eat you 23, 24, 25 minutes if he needs to. That's extremely underrated, I feel like, by a lot of fans, especially when it comes to maybe trading him for a guy that can get you 70, 80 points. So, and I know Montreal needs the offense. I don't think it's that crazy in a vacuum, the idea that the Habs move on from Guhle to get some really high-end scoring talent. I just think that the scoring talent, this top 6 guy people are throwing around, whoever it may be, I feel like you'd almost need a bit more if you're willing to move Guhle for a top-tier scorer, Jesse. It needs to be a top-tier scorer. And I don't care if you also need to move some other key picks there, right? You can move Guhle, you can move a first, you can move some crazy stuff, because that's probably what it's going to cost for an elite-level scorer. But just moving Guhle for a top 6 guy doesn't move the needle for me, especially considering the fact that we don't know if the Habs have any other bona fide top pairing left-handed defenseman in the system. You can get Dickinson, but you never really know. Hudson, can he ever be that like number one guy who can eat you 23, 24 minutes a night to play offense and defense? I'm not sold. You have some other guys. I just feel like, I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy and maybe I'm overvaluing Guhle, but I just don't think you can trade him for any old top 6 guy that can get you 70 or 80 points unless you really know what you're getting into.
Absolutely, right. And I think he's super valued from this Montreal Canadiens organization for a reason. The only way that I see a Guhle trade happening, and for sure, it's a fair point to bring up because obviously if we're looking to get a top 6, elite talent type of player, we hate to say it, right? Because we love Kaiden Guhle, but that's the type of cost that it takes. Such a great player, such as Cayden, right? Super unfortunate, but let's say an opportunity where it's like, situation rather where like Lindstrom and Demidov are both selected. Ken Hughes goes up to the podium, selects Xhekaj, right? That's for me the only situation where it's like, okay, you only got so many spots for, your top 2 defensemen, which obviously like a Kaiden Guhle would be right on your left-hand side. That's the only way. But for me, it doesn't fit the timeline of this team because William would take a while to come into our lineup. Like, even though we still got some depth, we got Matheson, we got Hudson. I don't know, like, Guhle provides something unique to this team. Like, Matheson, sometimes he's unpredictable. Hudson, we still don't know 100% what we're getting. But Guhle, you can bank on this guy that he's going to improve. He's going to get better. And I think in 5 years' time, I think that whichever team has this player is going to be very happy because he's still a very young guy. And the way that he's getting this trial by fire, I feel like all this experience is going to serve him so well in just a couple years' time, really paying dividends to the Montreal Canadiens as they look to be competitive and get on a run. You're getting him playoffs, and he has all this experience of playing against all these tougher lineups. And now you have more depth, and he's playing against lesser competitions, those third lines a little bit more instead of the top line from the other night. Like, this is the type of situation where Kaiden Guhle thrives most defensively, but then is able to take advantage offensively because I think it's definitely there. The skating's there. I think he's going to take advantage a little bit more. Kaiden Guhle is going to be looking to have the puck on his stick, and he's going to get the green light. If he's got the puck on his stick, he's seeing the lane, carry it into the offensive zone because I think there's still a lot more of that in his game. So, yeah, obviously, like, it would really hurt to trade a player like this. And for me, it just doesn't make sense because getting a William, like, that's a couple years down the line, right? And I think we're going to be competitive within the next couple. So Cayden just fits that nucleus of what we need so much. And that's why I think he's so highly valued.
I love Guhle. I think you're bang on with every single point, especially the timeline thing. How often have we talked about this timeline? Would you really be willing to give up? Like, I know you need top end scoring, and in theory, you're giving up Guhle for someone that can give you that top end scoring that also fits the timeline. But people are acting like that replacement on defense is just going to be not easy to come by. But like you said, you draft like an 18-year-old defenseman, and it's like they're not going to be where Guhle is until 3 years from now, right? So, like, unless they have a crazy fast development curve, but you don't often win very much in the playoffs if you have an inexperienced decor who's like 20, 21 years old, right? So I just feel like Guhle does so much good. I'm calling this year as a breakout season for him. I think he's going to be considered one of the top defensemen in the league by the end of this year. I'm not going to put a number, top 10, top 15, whatever, but I think he's going to be acknowledged as being a phenomenal two-way guy. Don't forget, Guhle consistently has some of the top skating burst speeds in the NHL. He's like over 20 miles an hour, so much, him and Matheson. And I do see people saying, you trade like Xhekaj, Harris or Matheson before Guhle. Okay, yeah, I agree on that front. I just think that, again, if we're talking strictly about trying to get someone who's really, 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 really good on offense, you have to give your best guys. And then those teams are probably starting with Suzuki, Caufield, Guhle, Reinbacher for who they would want for an elite level talent. But I'm going to shut this Guhle talk down. I think most of us here are in agreement that you don't trade Guhle. But yeah, that is what it is. And I wanted to say, I see a comment there from Ivman. Hello, boys. Don't forget to hit the like button. Go Habs, go. Totally not biased picking that comment there, but we're at 62 likes with 260 people. Let's get that like number up. If we can hit 100, we'd really, really appreciate it, guys. But Jesse, I wanted to move on to some other trade talks. Now, this is stuff that we kind of found one article, but there's another one there that is kind of something that we kind of came up with on our own. But I wanted to start with this one. So bear with me here as I get the correct picture up because that can be tough. So this is from Luc Leblanc at the Hockey Writers. The link is in the description. If you want to go read this full article, I suggest you do it. He said the Canadiens should trade for Dylan Holloway, and this is a name that's been thrown around quite a bit this season. We've talked about Holloway once or twice in videos over the course of this past season, but basically says with the season winding to a close, Panthers and Oilers are fighting for hockey's biggest prize. The Oilers, well, they're looking probably to keep competing, but Dylan Holloway has just not been doing it for him, guys. Dylan Holloway spent a lot of time in Bakersfield this year. He was really good in Bakersfield, 10 goals in 18 games. But he just hasn't clicked in the NHL yet. He's a 6'1 winger. He's only 22 years old. He's just not really clicking in Edmonton the way they wanted him to. 5 goals in 22 playoff games. So he's doing something, right, for the Oilers. He's getting that playoff experience, but something is just not working right for him. And a lot of people have been tagging him as a potential guy for the Habs to go after. Jesse, I know he kind of fits the bill size-wise. He fits the bill timeline-wise. I feel like he wouldn't be that expensive to acquire. And I think he actually has some decent upside when we're talking about guys that could potentially break out into like maybe jump from his whatever 6, 8, 9, whatever goals up to like a 20-goal season within the next year or two. I don't see him as like a perennial top 6 guy for your team necessarily. I think that potential is there, but he feels like one of these buy low candidates, right? One of these guys that you have put very little risk in. And if you can just, even if you give him time on the third line or something, I see a comment there saying I'd rather Holloway than Ullinen. I mean, yeah, me too, right? Like you give him some low risk minutes, see if he can produce within your system, see if you can help him out a bit more than the Oilers could. And maybe you turn some garbage into gold. I don't want to call him garbage. He scored 5 goals in the playoffs. Like that is not what I mean by that. But you know what I'm saying, right? You turn someone into something they could be into what they were envisioning when they drafted him. I actually think this is a very interesting move to consider. Whether Edmonton does it for the price the Habs would offer, I don't know. But what are your thoughts on Dylan Holloway?
I think it's an interesting proposition, right? He definitely fits the young kind of side that we're looking for. His speed fits this, the type of game that we like to play as well. I feel like he's endearing himself definitely to the Edmonton Oilers with his play of late, but also to other teams as a result, right? So it'll be interesting to see. I feel like the Edmonton Oilers, they don't got a ton of prospects. So the ones that they have, they're definitely going to want to hold on to, right? But obviously there's cap concerns, there's everything else there. So there definitely could be some wiggle room there. I think what is interesting to note with this player is for sure, his career hasn't been super amazing to start off, at least at the NHL level. But as soon as he's had an opportunity to play with top 6 level talent, which, obviously, I think young talented players, it's such a catch-22 because that's what they need to succeed. But can they get through that grind of playing with those 4th and 3rd liners to get your opportunity, right? Because that's all you need. And that's what he's getting right now is one opportunity. Okay, playing a little bit with Draisaitl and then playing well as a result. I don't think it's too crazy to ask for talented players. I think at a certain point need to play with other, very skilled players as well, right? It's just a whole point of getting there. Obviously, he's paying his dues. But for me, it's interesting that now once he is getting this opportunity, he is taking advantage, right? We see the size. I don't know. For me, it's when I'm looking at some other trade targets, just for the style of game that he plays, for me, he's one of the more intriguing ones.
He is very intriguing. And like some people are pointing out, the Oilers could use some solid young defensemen. I mean, this Darnell Nurse disaster class, these playoffs, he's definitely not doing great for his contract. Don't know what the future looks like for him, but Bouchard's going to be tied up for a long time with a lot of money. And they have Kulak. They've gotten a good Habs defenseman. That was actually a good trade for, well, I mean, it turned into Lane Hudson for the Habs, so I guess we'll have to see. But Kulak actually has played quite well for them since being traded there. So maybe they have a bit of faith in Montreal's young defenseman to trade over there and something for a Holloway. I see some people saying no, some people saying yes. I see no way. One person saying they'd love it. I don't know. Like Peter says in the chat there, at 22, Holloway has the goods and he's getting better. The Oilers will keep him, but they do need some quality young D. You can say that they'll keep anyone, right? But if they're enticed enough with someone that's kind of maybe fits their roster construction a bit better, that is equally as far along or maybe even a little further along than Holloway, they might be at least a little intrigued to take a swing on it. But yeah, that's kind of an interesting one. And I wanted to read a channel member. By the way, guys, if you didn't know, channel members get priority reading in comments and also donations. If you donate or you're a channel member, we'll read your stuff over the other stuff. I try to get, you can see, to some other messages, but it is what it is. Jesse, it's from Denis. And I didn't know this, didn't he? Born in 1954. He said, I saw the big three defense of the Montreal Canadiens. We will have a big five group soon. It might be a big six. It might be a big seven. The defense on Montreal could be absolutely insane. Denis, you are a veteran of the Montreal Canadiens. Experienced fan, guys. Give some love for Denis for not only being here, but for being a fan since some of those earlier Habs teams there in the 50s, 60s, 70s. What a legendary time that must have been to witness as a Habs fan. So shout out to you, Denis. But Jesse, I wanted to move on to someone else here. And this is a guy that is, he appeared on Frank Saravalli's recent list of top 25 trade targets. And we mentioned that in a video recently where we saw that David Savard and Christian Dvorak were both on that list. But there was one player from another team, and he's in the thumbnail. I don't know if you guys recognized who he was, but his name is Morgan Frost. And Frank Saravalli basically says after a rocky year that saw Frost sit as a healthy scratch for a chunk of the time, it sure ended well. Frost closed the campaign with 30 points in 44 games in the 2024 calendar year. One thing that doesn't appear to be changing, though, is Tortorella as their coach. There's been some pushback from Frost, and it seemed to do him well in Tortorella's books. It's not entirely clear whether they'll ever see eye to eye. And Frost, actually, Jesse, in that kind of do-or-die final game of the season, he was benched for most of that game. Even him and Atkinson, a couple other guys were just kind of benched. But if we take a look at his stats here, I think I got him right here. He was quite good. 13 goals, 28 assists for 41 points in 71 games. But don't forget, 30 of those points were in his last 44. He had a 19-goal season in 2022-23. He's 25 years old. He's a 6-foot-tall center. He'll have restricted free agency rights very soon. I think he's a very interesting idea for the Habs to get. I don't know if he fits necessarily because he's a center, and you have a lot of centers on this team that you're going to want to let breathe. But this dude's basically an established 20-goal scorer. What are your thoughts on Frost? And Planko, by the way, I see your super chat. I promise I'll get to that just after this segment because I want to talk about Frost a little bit first. But I promise I'll get back to you. What are your thoughts, Jesse?
The Montreal Canadiens were one of the teams in the NHL last year that had the fewest amounts of 20 goal scorers. We weren't the bottom, but we were definitely near there, right? So we have to talk about this. We need to consider players, 25, he's going to start getting his peak. You have to feel like, he'll definitely be, a 20 goal scorer on the regular, right? That being said, it's like he could be an interesting addition just if we're looking at this type of player more of on our third line. If we feel like we got our two top lines a little bit more set, then for sure. But I don't want to bring Frost in to be a top six sort of guy because I feel like that is what the Montreal Canadiens seem like. If we're going to go that far to get Frost, like you kind of said earlier, it's like I'd rather go a little bit further and really kind of get that player we need because I feel like we have the depth. Mm-hmm. And the Montreal, even for years, right, we've been a team like kind of even going to the Bergevin area, like running four lines and we're all pretty good, but none of them through the top. And I feel like a lot of Habs fans right now where I want that change of air where we're starting to get those elite level top six type of players, right? But that being said, 25, still fairly young man. We see that the size is there. It does fit a lot of the things that Kent Hughes has said specifically that he's looking for. You have to feel like Jeff Gordon and Kent Hughes have spoken about this player specifically, right? There's a lot of things to like, but for sure, I think what's kind of the deal breaker for me, besides looking at the points, the age, the size, the mentality is the culture. It keeps coming down to that, right? I know we're getting so picky. We're almost spoiled in this Kent Hughes era, but we feel we can just get our pick of the litter of, the player that perfectly fits this ideal of what this new age Montreal Canadien is, right? I don't think you can always do that. I think you got to work with players as well and not expect everybody to be perfect, but kind of to work with them as well. But as much as possible, I think that that's super important, right? He definitely isn't the first player to get into with John Tortorella, but that's definitely a red flag for me.
Yeah, it's a bit weird. I mean, there are some red flags, and I see someone talking about Joel Farabee as well. I think he'd be better, but I think he might cost more. It's give and take, right? Like, there's a lot of good ideas here, but I think you're right. Like, Frost as a third-line center, I would be thrilled if Frost was the third-line center, right? You can, alternate your centers. You got Suzuki, you got Dach, you got Newhook, then you have Frost, and then I'm assuming you move Dvorak in this case, right? So I think that could be amazing if you can swing that deal. Because, if they're going for that, I kind of feel like, why not? Because he could develop into something more. But if you get him with the idea that he's not going to be a guaranteed top six guy, or you're not hoping for him to be a top six guy, it could work really well. So very, very interesting. But Jesse, I wanted to get back to the super chat because we always got to honor the super chats. Thank you so much, Planko, with the €5 donation. That's like 375 Canadian dollars for if you, I always make that joke. It's not true. But Planko, the question is, so for a long time, we're only talking about forward and defenseman trades. I'm pretty sure I'm going to translate this right because there's a lot of acronyms here. As much as I love Montembeault, are Montembeault and Primeau playoff level goalies? Fowler is far, far in the future. I assume that's what you're saying with that stuff, and correct me if I'm wrong. But oh yeah, no. So you did say he's far, far in the future. He's 19. He will not see NHL ice for at least 5 years. Talking about Fowler, I think he might see NHL ice a bit before that, but I think like a lot of NHL ice. You're very right. Yeah, okay, I got it. Good, he confirmed. So I think that story is yet to be told, Jesse. I think we're seeing Montembeault have a pretty solid ceiling, but I don't see him being like their tandem when you compare them to other goalies in the NHL and their expected goals saved above expected, the expected goals against, stuff like that. Like they actually performed quite well as a tandem, like top 10 in the NHL in a lot of categories and at least top 15 in some others. Having a bit of a smaller sample size, but while being a trio for a good amount of the year with Jake Allen. So I see them being a nice competitive goalie tandem. Do I see them as a playoff caliber goalie tandem? I mean, you look at some playoff caliber tandems. I mean, you look at what Vegas did with Fleury and Leonard, and then even Aiden Hill and Logan Thompson, and then you look over at Boston where you got Ullmark and Swayman, and it's like these are like Vezina caliber goalies that you're putting out there every single night, and I'm not sold that either of these guys will ever get to that tier. I'm not saying it's impossible because goalies are almost impossible to predict. But Jesse, I can't help but think that the goalie that backstops Montreal to a Stanley Cup, if we're to win within the next 5-10 years, I feel like it's not going to be one of these two guys. And I hate to say that. And I'd love for them both to stick around in some capacity. I think Primeau arguably has the higher ceiling at this point, but I don't know. I don't see the Habs winning a cup with just those two guys. Maybe I'm too cynical, but I just think you need to have the top end goalies that win cups, Jesse. They're like Vezina caliber a lot of the time, or at least they have that ceiling, and I just haven't yet seen it from these guys.
That's a great question, Planko, and I'm so happy we're having this discussion. Is Montembeault and Primeau kind of that duo that you can have success with in the playoffs, right? And as you said, Josh, I think that's still to be determined a large amount. I think Primeau still can surprise us. He's shown us that time that there's a lot of skill there, right? Mm-hmm. That being said, is like looking at past history just of recent years, like Aiden Hill for sure played really well in that run, but was a little bit like a unknown before then, right? If you do get a goalie, like it doesn't always need to be at the top level. Just obviously he was playing at a high level at that point in time, right? But that being said, it's like, I am of the school of thought that, having a very good goalie does help you like a lot in the playoffs. Obviously, we're seeing the difference that Bobrovsky is making for the Florida Panthers. For me, it's like, obviously, if you win that first game, I think the exact statistics are somewhere around like 75% chance of winning the series if you win that first game. Mm-hmm. And for me, Bobrovsky totally stole that one. Like if the Florida Panthers win the cup, not just for that first game, but for many other reasons. Like he is going to be such a big part of that. Like you do need those solid goalies. Maybe I'm a little bit biased myself because it's my favorite position to play of players and everything. We've been so gifted with obviously an amazing tradition here in Montreal of some of the best goalies that have ever played. And we've seen what Carey Price himself, pretty much putting the team on his back. He almost got us a cup just a couple years ago. So there's a lot to be said about that. Like, I personally do agree that I think at some point, if we are looking to take that next level, obviously Fowler's going to take a little bit of time. I could see a world where Fowler is now the backup to just somebody new that we have in our system. I don't want to disparage anybody we have. Like, I love watching Montembeault play. He's gotten a lot of respect for me over the last couple of years, the way that I've seen that he's really a competitor. Obviously, Primeau, I think that, he's really impressed us. The odds were against him. I think he should deserve a lot of respect for having his back against the wall and still playing like pretty good, right? And I think that there's a lot left for him. But I think, to take that next level at a certain point, I think you do need that star goalie. But it's interesting, right? Where do you want to invest on your team, right? Do you want to outscore the other team, or do you want to play that better defense and have a good goaltending system? Now, we know the Montreal Canadiens, we want more offense now. We know that's the kind of style that we want to play, but we just can't get around it. Again, this year's playoffs with Florida, we're seeing that defense does win, right? So having that key goalie, I think maybe making that move in the future, if Primeau doesn't somehow kind of steal it, if Fowler doesn't kind of progress super quickly, I wouldn't be surprised if the Montreal Canadiens do look to upgrade in this department.
Wouldn't surprise me. And like Polanco, I see you're right. Like Primeau showed some godly saves, but here's the thing. And I'm curious, Zachary, he said he's got some insights about Primeau from working with Laval Rocket assistant coaches there. So they're gonna stay with him, but he said Primeau's ready with the mental game. So I'll trust him on that. Zachary, we're gonna hold you to that. That's actually kind of interesting. And also Polanco saying that big problem for Primeau and a bit for Montembeault was the 3-goalie situation. And Denis saying the Canadiens should 100% go for players with attitude that dedicate to give their skin for the logo and for the fans. That's such a big thing too, right? Having these guys who want to bleed for the team every day. Here's my thing with the goalies, Jesse, and I think this might be the last thing we talk about before we clue up. Unless you have any other donations or channel members, let us leave them now, because I think we'll clue up in a few minutes after this stop. Here's my thought. So hear me out. I'm not a rant. I went on a bit of a rant about Line A in a video, and some people liked it, some people quite didn't. They didn't agree with me, but that's okay, because it spurs engagement. Anyway, speaking of engagement, if you can get 7 more likes, we can hit 100, so thank you. Here's my thoughts on the goalies. When you look at teams, right, having that elite goalie not only helps you in the playoffs because you know they're going to be there every single night for you with a good performance at worst, but they help you a lot in the regular season. And while I know hockey's a very unpredictable sport, I mean, it's not quite as unpredictable as something like baseball, I would say. The results of a 7-game series can really go either way a lot of the time. But so the regular season does matter. Your seeding does matter. Maybe not as much as basketball or whatever, but in hockey, it still matters, right? Like if you get to play at home a bit more, that home ice advantage is a real thing. Your fans, your crowd, and the teams that are below you, sometimes even if you just have a little bit of an edge, it gives you that extra chance. And having an elite goalie, or at least goalie tandem in the regular season, like Boston had, that can lead to a really good regular season and make your path to the finals a bit easier. And the reason I bring that up, and people say the regular season doesn't mean anything, you just need a hot goalie going in the playoffs. That's the thing though, right? So if you get to the playoffs and you're a low seed because your regular season, you had solid goalies, but they weren't amazing. And you had like 6 or 7 games where they let in more goals than they should. And that caused you to bump down in the standings. You don't have a tougher path. So your goalie needs to go nuclear if you want to make the finals, whereas they can maybe have a little more leeway if you're already a top seed. But it is true that you can have like a really, really big goalie, like a really good goalie that can be hot and bring you to the cup finals. Look at Jonathan Quick. Look at someone like a Carey Price. Now, these guys are already elite, but even this year, like someone like a Stuart Skinner had a really, really good stretch, Jesse, but then there were moments where it's like still like he's letting in some goals here and there. So, but if you have good goalies, the odds that someone going nuclear, if you're just not that good of a goalie, is way lower than if you have a good one, right? So while yes, if you make the playoffs, any goalie in theory could go on a crazy 20-game hot streak and win you a cup, but how common really is that? I just think that elite goalie is something they need. That's kind of my little rant, I suppose, but like unless this goalie is in the top 5, top 10 Vezina conversation, I think I think you got to look for someone else if you're not already in that conversation. Even someone like a Saros, I would consider in that conversation. You know, maybe I'm too much off my rocker here, but I just think they need someone elite.
I hear you, right? It definitely does help, but we've definitely seen teams win in the past sometimes with like, remember when the Pittsburgh Penguins were winning with like not even the best defensive core and not even the best goaltending, right? They just had their solid kind of nucleus of a team. Like you definitely can still do it through that way, but it just seems like time and time again, right? Like offense is so important, but it does like that. We sound like old men say it, but like the defense wins championships, right? It's just, for me, watching the playoff games again, like that's just coming through. There's certain things you control in the game, but for sure, having an elite goalie, you're now taking one of the biggest factors in the game and really increasing your opportunity of succeeding in this very important facet. So just like, you know, purely speaking from like, you know, statistical kind of mathematical view, obviously it's super important to have that, right? At the same time, but there is other strategies that are being used, but obviously we've seen like with the Toronto Maple Leafs, it's been a big issue for a long time. I think if they would have invested a little bit more like in their goalkeeping in the defense, they probably had everything else they needed, right? But they were missing that. But it's interesting to hear the different schools of thoughts on that.
Yeah, for sure. And you know, it is what it is. Very interesting. And I'm going to get to the super chat from Denis in just a second, but I do see something there from Zachary. I wanted to answer this because it's on topic. Just look at Georgiev on their cup run. You just need a B- to B+ to win. It's about the full team. I completely agree. However, those Colorado teams have a habit of making their goalies look much better than they actually are. Look at Grubauer as well, because their team build, like, yes, it does matter a lot about team build as well. You're very right. But their team build was so designed. Like, they had some of the best offensive players in the world while also having an absolute shutdown defensive game. And like, when they were able, like when they were on, their goalies were not facing any tough shots. So I do completely agree with you. It's not only about the goalie, but I will say that having that high tier goalie definitely just increases your chances quite a bit more. So that's actually a fantastic point, but you need to be a special team build to have a B- goalie go to the finals, and the Colorado Avalanche were a special team. I want to get to this super chat. Denis Rongier, $10. Thank you so much, Denis. Always here, a staple of our live streams. And he actually suggests we should have another live stream every week, Jesse. 2 live streams a week. Well, we'll see how much we can commit to that. We're busy, fellas. We're going to try our best to get live streams to you guys. I know you guys love them. We love talking with you as well. But guys, don't forget, mark it on your calendars. June 28th. That's a Friday night, I believe. The NHL draft. We are going to be live for it. And if you guys want to share, I know you're all going to want to share in that excitement with us who the Habs pick. Come on to our live stream June 28th. We'll probably schedule it very, very soon. And we'll also probably have a special guest for a June 29th episode of Habs Digest. So definitely be keeping an eye out for that. But thank you for the kind words, Denis. We'd love to do some more. And like I said, hey, that week of June 28th, next week, we're going to have some nice, fun stuff. And Planko, final question. This is the last thing we're going to touch on because Planko channel member, final message of the stream. Small question for the end of the stream. Do you think Edmonton can bring your Stanley Cup to Canada? Last game was nuts. Can? Yeah. Will they? No. Florida's just too good, Jesse. I mean, Bobrovsky had an off game. Like, I think if Edmonton's going to win, it would take nothing short of a miracle. I just think Florida's the better team. Like, McDavid and Draisaitl are probably the 2 best players in the series. You could argue Barkov with Draisaitl, whatever. I mean, Edmonton has the better top-end players. I just think Florida's the much better team. I think they have the much better like defensive game, and I think they're almost doing better than Edmonton at beating them using their own game, minus the 8-1 loss, obviously. But if Bobrovsky gets back to normal, I don't see where Edmonton wins, as sad as it is to say.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be tough for sure for Edmonton to win this series. Of course, it would be absolutely amazing for that to happen. We got to, if you're the Edmonton Oilers, you got to keep playing hockey until, you're completely limited till the fat lady sings. It's not over till then. But yeah, it's going to be so tough. And that's why I feel like, this loss, if it does end up happening for the Edmonton Oilers, will hurt so much, is because they played so well, right? But then they're controlling play, but then the Florida Panthers is just so good at that counterattack, right? Like, they just get the puck. All they need is so opportunistic. Any opportunities they get, that's what hurts. Is like, your Edmonton Oilers, like, you're playing so well. And obviously, like in this last game, they show what they're capable of. Now, if there's one thing that'll really get them going, for sure, they needed, Draisaitl, McDavid activated in terms of like scoring goals. Obviously, we're not going to knock them. Like, they're producing points, but definitely getting in on that way, right, is going to be so important. So I could see them giving a couple games. Like, they got a lot of confidence after this. They made some key lineup changes. I think putting Fogle on that first line. Again, these players you don't expect sometimes, right? Where it's like, take a third liner, put on your first line, that those dynamics, right? I think worked really well for them. I think that'll probably continue to. So I mean, I have faith in this team. I'd love to see them push it to 6. I'd love even more to see them push it to 7. But obviously, it's going to be really difficult again because that defensive game, right? It just comes down to it once again, where really that seems to be the trick a lot of the time in the playoffs.
Yeah, I think you're right. I'd love to see it. I think it'd be so much fun, not only for Canada, but just to just see that as a hockey fan, it'd be unbelievable. But yeah, thank you for the question. And Planko, I think you might be onto something. I don't know. You guys can go look at the chat, see what I'm talking about. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff. Jesse, you got a ton of comments coming your way. They're saying your smile's mesmerizing, flashing the perfect teeth. It really is something. Oh my gosh, so many kind comments coming in here at the end from everyone. Josh's smile too is really something. Not as nice as Jesse's, I gotta say, but hey, we appreciate that very much. You two are legit the best duo. Love your streams. Well, thank you, David. Thank you so much for being here. Jesse smile deserves a Lady Bing. Jesse for Colin Smythe. Oh, Jesse, I think we might have to get some award votes up for you. But guys, thank you all for tuning in. Thank you for watching this episode of Habs Digest. If you enjoyed, leave a like, comment, subscribe to the Habs Digest channel. Leave a like on your way out. Hit subscribe if you haven't already. We'd really appreciate it. I'm Josh Gosse, my co-host, Jesse Poirier. We'll catch you in the next one.